What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Fall of X and the return of the Phoenix Force. Now, this all takes place in the Jean Grey comic, and we're actually going to cover the final issue because honestly, the other ones are really hard to follow if you don't know the history of Jean Grey. But it's a lot easier to follow if we do this one because then I can make it all make sense. So the thing to know is that at the very beginning of the Fall of X storyline, Jean Grey was basically killed off, right? Like she was one of the mutants who died. We know she did a couple things here and there, but in the aftermath of her death, Jean Grey was actually transported to the White Hot Room. Why is that? So in Marvel Comics, it's been established since really Phoenix Endsong and Phoenix Warsong, some old school comics from back in the day, that when Jean Grey dies, she won't actually go to the realm of Mistress Death, that she will go to the White Hot Room. And the reason for that is the Phoenix Force exists in the White Hot Room. And the Phoenix Force is kind of like this omniversal concept, meaning the Phoenix Force only exists as one entity throughout the entirety of the multiverse, much like the Living Tribunal, Oblivion, different things like that. But different people in different universes can be a host for a portion of the Phoenix Force's power. But Jean Grey, among every being in the multiverse, is the one perfect host for the Phoenix. So it's almost kind of like she's going home to where she's supposed to be at. But the kicker about all this is that because she's here, what had happened over the first 3 issues of this story is she had come across these seminal moments in her life. The original Phoenix Saga, kind of the prelude to the Phoenix Saga, when she was first given the Phoenix Force itself, that in that story, she had chosen for Wolverine to have it instead of her. And then eventually Cyclops gets it. And she had done this because the question she had existing in the Phoenix Force after her death was, if I had done things differently, how would things have transpired? Was it a decision that I made? Now, the reason why she takes this kind of logic onto herself is because when she was the host of the Phoenix at the full height of her power, the White Phoenix of the Crown, as she was called, she was astronomically powerful. Her power, I would argue, rivaled that of the Living Tribunal. There really isn't a one-to-one comparison. There really isn't an instance where like she fights the Living Tribunal. We kind of have to do what power scalers do and sort of cook the books in order to come to a conclusion there. But the fact remains here that she was incredibly capable. So the choices she made and the decisions that she made very much impacted not just the main Marvel universe, but any possible alternate realities that existed out there. And that's why all these versions of her immediately start attacking her and are just exceedingly angry at her. And one of the things that happens here is that as she's talking to one of herselves and really talking more to the Phoenix Force than anything else, it seems a little bit cloak and dagger. But one of the things she says is she says, "Why are all of you so angry? It can't simply just be because we're dead. We've been dead before." And one of them simply says, "Don't you get it? We're figments of your past, figments of your nightmares, products of imaginary stories you've been telling yourself. None of this is real, but then I was never real, except here in the White Hot Room, everything is real in its own way." And Jean asked the question, "What do you mean?" And that's when they kind of reference what she's been doing so far, which is in some ways kind of restructuring and reorganizing the White Hot Room to create what are in effect pocket realities. Literally what Jean's been doing here is she's been using the power she has, which this is an astronomical level of power, but she's been using this power she has to kind of reconstruct reality to make it look like events from the past, and then changing those just to see what happens. This is no different than someone like the Living Tribunal or whoever it is creating a universe out of thin air and then changing things that happen in that universe over the time of that universe just to see what takes place. She's literally messing with reality, but not just toying with it. It's like you, a full adult, being given Legos, right? For you, it's child's play. It's just kind of a thing that you're doing. That's what's really so crazy here. But one of the things that happens is that one of the Phoenixes tell her, "You use those memories to forge together a terrible future. You brought the Phoenix into it. You made me what I am. And everybody died." So this is kind of her referencing the reality she created where Wolverine got the Phoenix Force and then literally Cyclops got the Phoenix Force. But because of the chaos that followed during that time, in effect, everybody on Earth was destroyed, right? Now, this could also be a reference where what if the Phoenix Force never really became sane after becoming the Dark Phoenix and wiped out the entirety of the universe? It's a really cool what if story, right? Like, what if the Dark Phoenix killed the Marvel Universe? It's pretty awesome. It's pretty dope. It's old, but it's really, really good. But it's one of those things where the Phoenix itself is really what's communicating with Jean here. Because what the Phoenix says is it says, you should have trusted me. You are mad at yourself. And so what's cool is Jean says, no, I needed to consider the ramifications, to think things through. That's why she's kind of going through and creating these different realities. Because by passing the Phoenix Force on to somebody else and rejecting the Phoenix Force for herself, even entertaining the idea, the Phoenix itself sees this as an insult. Right? The very fact that you wouldn't trust me, the very fact that you consider there was a possibility that I, the Phoenix Force, this sum total of all life that has ever, currently does, and will ever exist in the multiverse, that you would believe that I was wrong, that I chose incorrectly. What hubris, what arrogance for you to believe that. And that's why these kind of facsimiles of Jean are appearing. It's all the Phoenix Force. And it's almost kind of taunting her, it's angry at her, but it's also trying to get her to understand what's really going on here. Because literally Jean says, maybe it would have been better if it was someone else that was in charge of the Phoenix Force. Maybe it wasn't all up to me. But that's where the statement's made. Whereas in reality, the Phoenix had hidden your body. And while you healed, it took on your aspect. In your name, it destroyed the Dabari's world. Unfortunate, but not your fault. It rode your anger, your need, as far as was possible until your true will asserted itself and stopped it. You died, of course. Now, what's being referenced here? This is a very important thing. What's being referenced here is the Phoenix and the Dark Phoenix sagas in Marvel Comics. So for those of you guys who aren't really familiar with that, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to cover this issue and then just kind of harken back to things in Jean Grey's history. When Jean first became the Phoenix, she had simply just achieved a crazy power boost. And it was really cool, right? She shot out of the water in Jamaica Bay. I am Phoenix, right? Like just one of the most iconic moments, not really in just Marvel history, but like comic book history, right? Following the conclusion of the Phoenix saga, Mastermind, also known as Jason Wingard from the Hellfire Club, had basically taken Jean and then used his power to manipulate the five senses to trick her into believing she was on like this Victorian era ship, right? That whole thing. But what ended up happening is that in order to break the connection between Jean Grey and the love of her life, Cyclops, Mastermind used his powers to trick Jean into thinking Cyclops had been killed. And in fact, the exact opposite happened, that despite the Phoenix Force being this incredible source of power, it had never experienced rage. It had never experienced the feeling of loss or love or anything like that. So quite literally, it went insane with emotion. And so what's being talked about here, the Phoenix Force had hidden your body and took on your aspect and all that kind of stuff, that at the end of the Dark Phoenix saga originally, Jean Grey had momentarily regained control of the Phoenix Force, which had essentially taken over her mind and was just driven by madness. Jean ultimately flew herself, out there and then basically sacrificed her own life, and Jean was supposed to die. Because of the popularity of Jean Grey and the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas and all that kind of stuff, Marvel ended up having to bring her back from the dead. The funny thing is it started off with Chris Claremont as a bluff. Jim Shooter called it, then made him kill Jean. So actually it was a writer who came up with the idea. It wasn't done by Marvel editorial, for those of you guys who always believe that Marvel writers can do no wrong. So the thing here is that what had happened in that follow-up story is it was actually in the Fantastic Four. They had gone down to the bottom of Jamaica Bay. They had found a cocoon down there. When they brought it to the X-Men and it was opened up, Jean Grey was inside. And that's when you got the big revelation that basically said that the Phoenix, as it appeared, was never actually Jean. It had just taken on her physical form, and the real Jean was healing down in the bottom of Jamaica Bay. That's an important thing to understand with regards to her history, but that's what's being referenced here, right? And that's why when the Phoenix says, but that wasn't the end, not by a long shot, they found your true body cocooned beneath the sea and awakened you, that's what she's referencing, right? And she says, you are returned to Scott. All was restored. How is that terrible? And the response of Jean is, because of what came afterward. Impulsive arrogance didn't work, so I tried logic. The response of the Phoenix, and set them up to die. Not everyone, just your dearest loves. And that's where another personality chimes in and says, From that perspective, the reality was so much kinder. To you anyway, surely you haven't forgotten about me as much as you all would rather. And that's when Jean realizes this is Madeline Pryor. Now, for those of you guys who don't know about Madeline Pryor, she was a really cool character in Marvel Comics. Now she's boring as hell. She sucks. But the cool thing about Madeline is that the villain Mr. Sinister had come to the realization that if Jean Grey and Cyclops ever had a child, their child would be astronomically powerful. And while they technically never really did, it did kind of happen in Age of Apocalypse. That's where you get Nate Gray from the 1990s, that ridiculously OP character, X-Man as some people call him. But Madeline Pryor was a clone. Right? She was the attempt of Sinister to clone Jean Grey and then try to initiate a coupling between Madeline Pryor and Cyclops. The funny thing is, behind the scenes, this was supposed to be the end. Jean Grey was dead, done, gone forever. Madeline Pryor was supposed to marry Cyclops and then literally ride off into the sunset, and Cyclops was never going to be seen or heard from again in Marvel Comics. Such as it was, Jean Grey ultimately returned. She joined X-Factor. Cyclops took off. He joined X-Factor as well. But Madeline Pryor initially didn't have any powers, didn't even really have any life. And that's why Jean refers to Madeline as my clone, right? Madeline says, Mr. Sinister's broodmare, mother of the mutant Nathan Christopher, renamed Cable, a blank slate with so many possibilities. Because Madeline Pryor and Cyclops did produce a child. That's the person that you all know is Cable. That's where he came from, right? And it's one of those things because she ultimately ended up going insane. Madeline Pryor did. And that's when she became the Goblin Queen, right? It's really cool the way that it's put together. Ruler of demons, new, improved, and in this reality, transmoted, given free reign over a techno-organically transformed world. I was mad. You were mad. We lost our tempers and things got a bit out of hand. The end of the world. Very cathartic, but maybe a bit too much, even for me. And so she's kind of referencing this sort of restructured reality that Jean had created where what if something else hadn't happened, right? Like, what if the whole situation with the original Inferno event from back in the 80s, what if that never took place? And so it's kind of the funny thing because the question here that's posed by Jean Grey is, would your life have been better? Right? Because had I never become the Phoenix Force and had I initiated a circumstance whereby I had never died or any number of those things, right? You never would have come to life. You never would have had any kind of a life. You never would have lived at all, right? That's why the question's asked. No kingdom to rule in hell, never alive, never feeling, no Scott, no baby Nathan, no nothing. And that's when the statement's made, now you're getting it, right? And that's where things get cool because we have fine minds as minds go, but that's not our greatest asset. Heart, depth of feeling, that's what called the Phoenix to us. Love is what you're all about. I have other priorities. Inferno happened for better or for worse. It's not the worst thing I've had to face. Life is a process, however you are created. We all learn, even you, even me. And that's when the Phoenix really begins to kind of step in and says, that's better, right? You've been creating worlds to prove that you had no choice. Nightmare tales about how we, you and I, brought death and destruction, how you were damned if you did, damned if you didn't. All paths lead to death. Is this really the story you wanted to tell yourself? Your dreams so much more terrible than even this reality. Because the truth about Jean's character is, even after she returned following the events of Dark Phoenix and been forced to come to terms with her actions, she always blamed herself, right? Anything that ever happened with the Phoenix Force, she always blamed herself. When Rachel Summers became the Phoenix, she blamed herself, right? All these things she blamed herself about because in her mind, she was the first host for the Phoenix. She's the one who opened the door. She's the one that allowed the Phoenix to basically set up shop in the main Marvel universe, and anything to do with that level of energy that came after, any loss of life, any of that was all on her shoulders. So that's when she starts to remember, because at the very beginning of all this, she didn't remember anything, right? But then she starts to remember everything that had happened, the Hellfire Gala, the party, Orgus's attack on the mutant population, all those things that Jean tried to protect them and save them, but ultimately she failed. And so at the end of it all, she simply says, why didn't you come to me, right? You as the Phoenix, why didn't you bond yourself with me? And in fact, that's the question a lot of fans have been asking. Where's the Phoenix Force been through all of this, right? Jean is the host for the Phoenix. Why hasn't she become the Phoenix yet? And you get this amazing response, right? How could I? I'm as dead now as you are. Like you, I only exist here, a nexus between all Phoenix hosts and our eternal flame. I'm bits and pieces, inactive. The white hot room is the heart of the Phoenix, and it is broken. When you woke up here, you asked, what did I do wrong? The answer is nothing. Why do you think I encourage those terrible images where when you could have changed things, everything went wrong? What did you think I was trying to tell you? And the response of Jean is that my instinctive choices were right, that my impulse was true. And the response of the Phoenix is, you ultimately did all you could. You did the best you could given the circumstance that you were in and the power that you had. But the reality here is that there were other forces at play. And this is one of the best things. It's one of the reasons why I love Louise Simonson when she writes these stories, because Louise Simonson's old school, right? Chris Claremont, Roy Thomas, John Byrne, old school, right? Like back in the 80s, right? 70s, 80s, Marvel Comics, old school. Because she loved, in any of the stories that she ever had a hand in, she loved to invoke real world elements, right? Because who among us has ever been in a situation where despite having done everything that we could, we just felt like we could have done more? There's no evidence to indicate that. And in fact, all evidence is to the contrary. There's nothing more that we could have done. But for one reason or another, past traumas, whatever the case is, that we ultimately just hammer ourselves with this philosophy that like, we should have done more. We could have done more. But like, what more could you have done? You did everything that you could. There was only so much that could happen here. And so what Jean comes to the realization of is no matter what choices we make, in the end, death claims us all. And the response of the Phoenix is, but not us, at least not yet, not completely. And that's when Jean chimes in and says, we're not alone here. And there's one more thing we can do. Shall we do it together? Now, this is important because if you guys are following our coverage of Fall of X, the Immortal X-Men are in the white hot room. Those 250,000 mutants that were sent away from Krakoa by Xavier, right? He was forced to do that at the hands of Orchis, the group attacking mutants everywhere that they can find them. They ended up in the white hot room. We don't know exactly how they ended up there, but we know that they did. That's what Jean's talking about because she's been here the whole time. So for those of you guys who are following Immortal X, and literally in the last video that we covered, they're traveling through the white hot room and Jean's just suddenly there. This is the reason why. She's been there the entire time. She was just over in that area over there, right? Like if the white hot room is in the United States, everybody in Immortal X-Men was in New York, Jean Grey was in Missouri somewhere, right? That's kind of how this works. And so once she's there, she's not really there as a physical presence. They can't actually see her, but she is there in a kind of spiritual form. And of course, she sort of makes an offhanded remark that like Apocalypse being Apocalypse, right? He is a manifestation of the white hot room. It's not the actual Apocalypse, but he's doing what he does, which is just like going after people and so on and so forth, right? And then she sees Hope Summers and she says like, poor Hope, it's up to her now. Welcome to the white hot room. Now, an important thing to understand about Hope Summers, and people who have been reading Marvel for a long time already know this. This is more for the new folks. Hope Summers is a mutant who was the first mutant born after the events of House of M when the Scarlet Witch took away 98% of the mutant population's powers. Because of the fact that she was taken and rescued by Cable, even though she's not related to Jean, and in fact, there were theories out there that she was like a reincarnated version of Jean because Jean had been dead since Phoenix War Song and Phoenix End Song at this point in time, that turned out to not be the case. But because they bore a striking resemblance, the color of their hair, the color of their eyes, Cable ended up naming her Hope because she represented hope for the rebirth of the mutant population. And then he named her Summers because that was his last name. He, of course, took her on as a kind of daughter. But the reality here is that her ability is to copy the powers of anybody around her. This is a massive thing here because we always assumed this was a byproduct of a physical person who is walking around her. What this establishes is that all that really has to happen is the essence of a person, their spiritual form has to be around Hope, and then she can immediately copy their abilities, right? And so what Jean says is Hope's basic power is to mimic the abilities of those near her. There may be something we can do together. one last gambit. And that's why Jean touches Hope, and then Hope immediately manifests the Phoenix Force, right? Like literally takes on this amazing thing. And the question that the Phoenix asks is, did it work? And Jean, in a kind of spiritual form, watching over all of this, we don't know the answer to it. In fact, we'll have to find out in the newest Immortal X-Men comic, which is kind of funny because this seems to have more or less spoiled it. But the thing that goes on is Jean says, no longer am I the woman you knew. I am fire and life incarnate. Now and forever, I am Phoenix. And the question is, who knows, right? Like that is something else. At least we did no harm. And so the Phoenix says, so sure of yourself, so arrogant. And Jean says, just following my gut. But then you have this moment where Jean makes the statement, this isn't over, not for them, not for us. But what comes next, be it life or death, we face it together. So in effect, what Marvel is telling us is Jean Grey will become the Phoenix once again. How long it'll last, we don't know. But I'm excited, man, because I'll tell you guys right now, white hot, like white Phoenix of the Crown, Jean Grey, she can take all comers and she could crush pretty much anybody out there. The only exception is probably the Beyonders and maybe the Living Tribunal. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. If you need to get caught up on Fall of X, make sure you guys click this link to the playlist and I will catch you all later. Peace.